Sabena Stark, Claudia Lapp, and D.N. Wallace, who most of us know as Denise. And I'll start reading Sabena's bio, and you want to go in that order, right? Okay. So, Sabena Stark writes poetry, fiction, essays, and music. Her parents were immigrants and Yiddish speakers. Sabena learned English in New York City's PS 160. She is a graduate of U of O Journalism's Literary Nonfiction program. Her work has been published in Georgetown Review, Bridges Journal, and other literary magazines. Her book In Progress received the Oregon Literary Arts Fellowship. Her poem, High Holy Days, appears in Before There Is Nowhere to Stand, Palestine, Israel, Poets Respond to the Struggle. Lost Horse Press, 2012. She lives in Eugene. Welcome.
So grateful for all of you to come today. It's really wonderful to see all your faces. The three of us decided that we would bring in a poet to begin each reading of someone who inspires us. And I'm going to read two short pieces by Lisa Rosen, a beloved local poet who is on the other side of the veil now. And the first one I chose because English was my parents' second language. This is called ESL class. Blunders wake the greenest meaning. That's why I don't want to tinker with your words. Your sentences surprise, like grasshoppers leaping from our steps in a field we thought was empty. My English is broken, my writing is not very well, so help me and manything else. Believe me, grammar can be unsparing as pavement, flattening clover and color. We travel glibly and blur the joy of red apples hanging heavy from a neighbor's tree. Miss the slight cricks of hidden birds. After our story, you tell me, I am thinking hard between the girl and her mother. You pitch your voice and unsnap the dingy uniform that covers all we say. I know that I varnish my unknown words with smiling. I welcome truth, however you arrange it. I can touch a chord with it. This short one for Lisa, to Lisa, from Lisa. From where you are, you get a message to me. Today a heron stopped. I looked into the blue twilight of her wings and saw the breadth of freedom that belongs to you. Sky in your throat whispering, there is more to you than this body. Fixing that soft sentence like a net, and I could finally fall. So I'm going to read a couple of poems, and then a sketch, and then a section from my book. And this first piece is called Mommy with a Mustache. That mommy with a mustache drives a triple-axle truck. She runs over all the kids on the playground who are in the way when she comes to pick up her own kid. That mommy with a mustache works 10 jobs and has dinner ready at 6. She takes apart the kitchen sink and puts it all back together before it's time to go to school. All the teachers smile and are very polite to the mommy with a mustache. When she growls, the halls shake and lights blink on and off. That mommy with a mustache makes everyone at the PTA meeting be quiet and try not to squeak metal squeaky chairs when she's talking, even the principal. That mommy with a mustache has a girlfriend who looks like a movie star with dangly earrings. That mommy with a mustache plays the radio loud at the school carnival and brings Mexican cornbread to the fundraiser and never misses open house. But her picture isn't on the wall next to the other moms. She's so scary, no one can see her. But I see her. I see her. This is a grown-up poem. In the public shower room, where I first saw her breasts uncovered and wondrously ripe as I had imagined them, I wore my one piece to bathe, then awkwardly removed it, hiding behind a flimsy screen of water. We were friends, but I was smitten, and she was married. In my dreams, she loved me in a sun-graced hideaway where birds ran against the shoreline. We slept curled on a silky-faced beach, her tender hands resting on my back. Here we stood, grasping bleak white tiles with cold, bare feet, and worse, undressing with no other purpose than to rinse pool water off our skin. She didn't seem to notice my discomfort, disrobed carelessly and began to wash. I held my breath as she turned her flat bottom, turned her dear and familiar contours, and I wished I hadn't learned exactly how her breasts curved, how lavishly they rested on her ribs, or the way her broad hips moved, flaring from her waist like the arc of a Bartlett pear. I loved her imperfections, and for one moment could almost love mine. The water pressure improved, and I, suddenly bold, slow-stepped under the downpour, and facing her, tipped my head back into the flow, and the water splashed and spilled on all my naked hills and vales, like the gentle waves of Puerto Angelita, till my torso relaxed, skin warm, glistening in the pale steam that filled the room. Her short arms rose, narrow back still patched with soap. I reached for my handle. She reached for hers. We shut off the water together, like synchronized swimmers rising for air. I grabbed my towel, let my lungs fill, thinking I was brave and she was beautiful. So this is a scene from my memoir. It's kind of a sketch. It's called Day at the Beach. It was summer and a work day for my mother, but my big sister was out of school. I was not quite 4 years old. Susie was 9. My mother walked us to the subway entrance. She gave Susie a rolled-up bath towel and a bag containing sandwiches wrapped in wax paper and a package of Hostess cupcakes. She put 2 tokens in Susie's hand, one for going there, one for coming home. I didn't need tokens. I could slip under the turnstile. When we got into our seats on the subway, the bathing suit tie behind my neck got caught in my ponytail. Susie had to pull out a few hairs to get it loose, and we were both yelling before she could untie and retie it. At the Coney Island stop, the underground air was cooler and smellier than at our home station. Susie held me by the wrist and pushed us both through the crowd. We rode the escalator, and when we got to the boardwalk, the breeze tasted like salt and fish and little wafts of pee. "The beach!" beach, I yelled and broke free and ran into the sand, into the sea of people and beach towels and colored umbrellas and babies and radios and beach balls and fallen hot dog buns, and I was laughing, and Susie chased me between men and cigarettes and boys digging sand, and she yelled my name, and I dashed and slipped between women who smelled like suntan lotion and girls pouring seawater out of pails and over sand mats and soda cans and sticky ice cream wrappers, and I ran, and Susie came after me around ladies in bathing suits with big breasts and no breasts and sunglasses, and between families eating on chairs and swimmers returning, dripping water down their legs, and I was still running and laughing, the beach, and I couldn't stop, and radios were playing, and Susie screamed at me across the noisy strand and sprinted after me between so many colorful bodies, and when she caught up with me, she grabbed one of my thin arms, and I cried, and she walked us to a spot on the sand between teenagers and plastic buckets and bottles and cigarettes and paper cones and bathing caps, and she unrolled our towel, and we sat down. And I was afraid of the monstrous gray-blue ocean, but Susie lifted me and hugged me to her chest and walked us both toward the cool waves, and I screamed and hit her once hard on the head, and she held on and walked deeper into the sea, my legs tightening around her waist as the water rose, and I shrieked, no, I don't want to, and I tried to break free, but she held me and stood in the water until the salty gray waves splashed us up to my belly, and she ducked down without warning, and my head was drenched, and for one gasping moment I thought we would die in that terrible place, and I hated the beach, and I could see through the dirty water, and the salt tasted bad and burned my eyes. See, it's okay, she said, and dipped us down again, and I was stunned and sputtered and cried until she walked us back, both of us soaking wet to the shore, and we returned to our towel, and I sat down in my own puddle of water, staring at the hideous blue-gray waves, my feet caked with grains of sand, and we ate lunch, and the sandwiches were hot, and my cupcake fell, and Susie broke off the dirty part and gave me the rest. And later, she took us to the bathroom, where we showered across from two naked women in a room with no curtains, and the cement floor was gritty, and someone left a bathing suit on the floor in a pile of sand, and everyone walked around it. And on the way home, my bathing suit straps were hanging untied on my back, and by the end of the ride, Susie's eyes looked red, and my face and neck and the tops of my arms were burning. And Susie pulled us through the crowd at the Delancey Street stop, and we took the up escalator, and when we came back to our apartment, all the windows were propped open, and the table fan was spinning, and we could smell onions frying on the stove. My mother was taking a bath, and we could hear her sing a wordless song through the open bathroom door. And I yelled to my mother, Susie took us swimming! Susie took us swimming at the beach! So this is a little longer piece. It's the last one I'm going to read, and it's a book excerpt. I'm writing a memoir about my family, and this is kind of a large piece that occurred, and I'll just go ahead and read it, and you'll just jump in with me. Gabriel Doyle Lasky was 6 feet tall and solidly built. His blonde hair buzzed down to sandy-colored stubble. He had the reputation of being an enforcer for the Portland-centered neo-Nazi gang called Volksfront, one of the West Coast's most active hate groups. Gabriel shared a 2-bedroom apartment with 2 of his skinhead buddies. Another Volksfront member, Glenn Smith, lived next door. The young men in his apartment had posted an image of one of their heroes in the entranceway as a welcome sign, a black and white mugshot of Timothy McVeigh, architect of the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. Alongside McVeigh's photo was a copy of the 14 Codes of the Aryan Ethic, ending with the words, Racial survival is your perpetual struggle. The apartment was relatively big, 2 floors and a deck and back, a good spot for parties. They did a lot of drinking there. In this setting, Gabriel would help cook up a plan that placed my life and his into a challenging intersection. Gabriel was close to his older brother Jacob, who had advanced in the ranks of Volksfront to the position of Prison Affairs Coordinator, a title that reflected the group's focus on recruitment within the Oregon State prison system, the site where this gang emerged in 1994. One night in late October 2002, 8 weeks after his 18th birthday, Gabriel, his 22-year-old brother Jacob, and 3 of their 20-something skinhead friends decided to scare a bunch of Jews, as Gabriel later said. They collected rocks ranging in size from grapefruits to golf balls. One of the men carved swastikas into them with a knife. Laughing and smiling, they took photos of themselves and their handiwork. Gabriel imagined the relief he would feel doing something directly against those people he was told were responsible for destroying his life and the lives of his family members. 3 days later, on a Friday evening spent drinking beer with their girlfriends, the 5 men piled into Jacob's pickup truck. Jacob's girlfriend and another young woman came along for the ride. They arrived at their target around 9 p.m. Jacob stopped his truck in the middle of the narrow residential street in Eugene, headlights off, just past the bumpy asphalt patch of a parking lot alongside Temple Beth Israel Synagogue. The parking lot was full of cars. High on the building, translucent, multicolored stained glass windows were lit from the inside with the Friday night services. Jacob waited, engine idling, while Gabriel and the other men jumped out to the street armed with rocks. Some of their stones slammed against the outer wall and ricocheted into flowers and shrubs hugging the building. The larger stones nicked off pieces of brick before they fell. But Gabriel and his friends were aiming at the windows. They kept throwing until one missile arced into the glass. It struck the pane and bounced, leaving a white scar and a ripple of cracks. They kept throwing until one broke through, forming a small glass mouth with tiny, jagged teeth. Then another rock broke through the glass, making a satisfying pop when it hit. They found that it was surprisingly difficult to break the windows, but when they did, a spiderweb pattern erupted across 2 of the 9 panes. One broken pane was a colorful depiction of the Torah scrolls that seemed to be floating in air. The other, a blue and green Star of David ringed with a ribbon of red. The red ribbon symbolized the love that surrounded the synagogue from the interfaith community following a prior attack when this star had been shattered before. Within seconds, a lone woman came rushing out from the synagogue shouting, "I see you, I see you," but the men were already running back to their vehicle. Several other congregants appeared as the pickup truck sped away, headlights off, into the darkness of the autumn night. The group returned to Gabriel's apartment to celebrate and ran out of beer a little after midnight. Back into the truck, the men rode to Albertson's Market, intending to steal a few 6-packs. A clerk tried to stop them. He grabbed the sleeve of Gabriel's black flight jacket. The jacket had been adorned with white power and neo-Nazi patches, including the red and black Volksfront orb sewn conspicuously on the front. Gabriel couldn't shake him off, so he slipped out of his jacket and left it in the clerk's grasp as they ran away. Angered about this blunder, big brother Jacob returned to retrieve Gabriel's lost possession. He attacked the clerk, yanked his brother's jacket out of the clerk's hand, and shoved the young man to the ground. As the clerk hit the floor, Jacob kicked him in the head. His movements were recorded on the store security camera. 6 days later, the men showed up to harass attendees at Wow Hall's punk rock Halloween bash, yelling into the crowd, "White power!" and "You're all a bunch of N-loving race traitors," hoping to provoke a fight. The more the young men yelled, the angrier they got. It was a typical evening for Gabriel and their friends. The Bug River churns and meanders 530 miles north along the border of Poland and the Ukraine, on the east bank in the town of Podwoliczyska. In July 1941, my namesake, my grandmother Sabena, and her youngest daughter Rosa were murdered, shot into a trench of bodies by the Einsatzgruppen, the Nazi mobile killing units. Her 2 sons were taken away to become work Jews in a slave labor camp. One survived to write letters and have a child after the war ended. The other family members who made their home in that town and in the surrounding area, in households that included many children, remain unnamed inside the silence of my mother's past, vanished as if they had never lived. My mother, Sonia, 24 years old, was studying in a neighboring city when the Einsatzgruppen killed her family. She went into hiding and disappeared. The day she was apprehended by the Nazis, she had a daughter just old enough to be steady on her feet. Further north on the west shore, at the crook of the question mark that is the Bug River, lays my father's hometown of Domačevo. On the weekend of Yom Kippur in September 1942, every Jew, nearly 3,000 men, women, and children, were rounded up, stripped, and slaughtered. Somewhere under that unholy ground is my grandmother Sora Gittel, for whom my sister Susan was named, and my grandfather Baruch, aunts, uncles, and cousins, along with my father's 6 brothers and sisters, my father's first beloved wife, and his baby son, among all those whose names and memory were too tender to speak again. My father somehow escaped and survived until he too was captured by German police. But my parents didn't tell this to my sister and me. My father said that my mother hid in the coal bin of a train to escape the Nazis and secret her way across borders. My mother said my father was a soldier in both the Polish and Russian armies. When he escaped from the military police, he lived in the forest eating raw eggs he stole from farms in the countryside. He hated eggs. They told me that Hitler's envoys shot my mother's mother and her 10-year-old sister Rosa. Later, my mother's baby girl was murdered. The words my mother used to tell me this are almost unrepeatable. "They burned her," she said. Her daughter was so beautiful with long, dark hair. The father of her baby, her first husband, died as a soldier in the Russian army. When she felt good, my mother would sing the love ballad, "Under Paris Skies," and tell me about the handsome young man that was forever her true love. My parents found themselves in a displaced persons camp in Germany at the end of the war, and in May 1946 they boarded the Marina Persch, a ship that sailed them from Munich to America, along with my mother's one surviving aunt, who, like her sister, was named Rosa. There in New York City, they started a new life together. There was no logic, no context to how these pieces of tragedy and disruption fit together, except for the fact that they happened during one terrible war that was carried out by Hitler himself, in their telling. The unspoken agreement in my family was to contain my parents' eruptions, the spontaneous combustion that allowed these shards of grief to fly, not to ask questions that would provoke a new outburst. It was too painful for everyone. The outburst could erupt at any time, triggered by a song on the radio, a vaguely familiar face on the subway, an innocent question I asked. Once the eruption started, there was no comforting them. They would stop when they were worn out. That is how these stories came to me, tiny shards and splinters erupting from my mother and father's anger and sorrow, each one sparking more unasked and unanswered questions that never left me. Later, as records became available and I began research, the context and details of these fragments emerged. But the resonance of these stories, their undertow of music formed my cells, saturated my childhood. When I was 10 or 11, I made 2 silent promises to my family. First, I was determined to give birth to and raise at least one child. I would not allow Hitler to be the final arbiter of my family's genetic survival. And secondly, I would kill a Nazi. In my arithmetic of revenge, one life would have to equal the hundreds or maybe thousands of Starkmans, Schulmans, and Moisiks who had perished. In my child's mind, I decided I would either have to hunt down a Nazi or respond appropriately if one crossed my path. At the age of 28, I had been immersed in reading survivor testimonies and had pieced together some of the puzzle of my family's fragments. But there were some stories that didn't fit with the rest. My reading that year led me to ask my mother if they had survived the camps. Yes, she finally told me, we were in Auschwitz. She shared some but not much of what this meant. It was the most devastating chapter of their past, the one that explained why they were stripped of so much of who they once were, who they could have been. My father had died 6 years before my mother made this disclosure. He had held the secret of their internment all the way into death to shield his new children from the burden of this knowledge. While he was alive, he tried to protect us from imagined and real enemies. He never stopped fighting the war. Neither of them did. Rabbi Eric Weiss, director of the Jewish Healing Center in San Francisco, introduced me to the idea of God's economy. I had trained with him to work as a lay Jewish chaplain. During our studies, he asked us to identify for ourselves what presented the biggest obstacle in working with people at the hospital, our personal obstacle, because he assured us in God's economy, we would undoubtedly be faced with that obstacle within the initial 2 weeks. I have met my Nazi. In God's economy, he found me in a synagogue in Eugene, Oregon, on a cold fall night. He was an 18-year-old neo-Nazi skinhead who, with his brother and 3 others, flung swastika-etched rocks into our sanctuary windows, while I was inside preparing to sing the closing prayers of the Friday night Shabbos services. 3 years later, Gabriel and his friends were arrested. He was facing a federal prison sentence for a hate crime. And that year, a few weeks after my adult bat mitzvah service, where I had spoken about the tentative peace I had made with my history, Gabriel Doyle-Lasky contacted the synagogue through his lawyer, claiming he wanted to apologize to the community for his part of the crime. Rabbi Yitz called me to ask if I was willing to talk with him. I said yes.
What I didn't say in my introduction of Sabena is she's the only person ever that we used to meet in the coffee shop at the U of O so she could read me stories. That's all. We would just meet, drink tea, and she would read to me. And I hope we can do it again. Our next reader is going to be Claudia Lapp. Born in Germany, raised in Maryland, Claudia Lapp has lived in Eugene since 1991. For a decade, she has been an exhibition interpreter at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art, where she is known as a purveyor of poetry. Her non-digital photographs, Poet with a Pentax, have shown at New Zone Gallery. Recent poetry anthologies include The Fires from Her Window, 2008, What the River Brings, 2012, her latest chapbook, Boo, here for sale, published by Frayed Press, 2013. Reviews of Canadian poets for Poetry Quebec, Ezine. Collected works of Artie Gold, Cancer Songs, Richard Summer, and Floating Up to Zero, Ken North, 2012. Her review of Original Weather, edited by Laura Lehew, 2011, is yet unpublished. So, welcome, Claudia.
My breath's taken away by the arresting nature of your prose, both the joyous and the sorrowful. And let's remember that this is springtime and the time of new growth and new energy. And we need to celebrate healing in all its forms. By the way, today is the birthday of a well-known poet.
Just a
Billy.
little louder, please.
Oh, okay. So tell me if you can't hear. I can speak more loudly. Today is the birthday of Billy Collins. He turns 71 today. Or no, is that right? 73 today. 74. So not only is it the birthday of Joan's son, but Billy Collins. The poet that I would like to open with, interestingly enough, is a Polish one, Wisława Szymborska. I found this book at Powell's. She won the Nobel Prize. And the book is called Here, H-E-R-E, or in Polish, which I don't speak, Tuta. And it was very hard for me to pick a poet because there were too many choices. I thought, William Stafford. Well, here's someone with the same initials anyway. And I like her because I've recently come out of the closet as an elder, a senior, supposedly a wise woman. I've let my mane grow white, and what I like about Wisława is that she's got lots of humor. She's not a complex person. She's aware of the suffering of the world, and she's very honest about her poetry. She says, I really write a lot more than I publish. A lot of it ends up in the wastebasket, so I kind of feel like she's a kindred spirit. So this is her poem I wanted to read for you today. It has to do with memory. Hard life with memory. I'm a poor audience for my memory. She wants me to attend her voice non-stop. But I fidget, fuss, listen and don't. Step out, come back, then leave again. She wants all my time and attention. She's got no problem when I sleep. The day's a different matter, which upsets her. She thrusts old letters, snapshots at me eagerly, stirs up events both important and turns my eyes to overlooked views, peoples them with my dead. In her stories, I'm always younger, which is nice, but why always the same story? She gets angry when I shrug my shoulders and takes revenge by hauling out old errors, weighty but easily forgotten. Looks into my eyes, checks my reaction, comforts me It could be worse. She really wants me to live only for her and with her, ideally in a dark, locked room. But my plans still feature today's sun, clouds in progress, ongoing roads. At times, I get fed up with her. I suggest a separation, from now to eternity. She smiles at me with pity, since she knows it would be the end of me, too. Now you look at this picture of her smoking a cigarette, drinking a black cup of coffee with her books in the back. I would have liked to have talked to this woman, sat down with her. So speaking of the passage of time, I actually decided to begin my own part of the reading with a very old poem from my very first book of poetry, Honey. It's a real honey label that was published in Montreal in 1978. And the reason is that it's about the goddess energy, which we so need. Why the world is so screwy and unbalanced, and acceptable levels of cruelty steadily rising, as Evelyn Rich says, is because we've cut the feminine off, and the female energy and the shamanic energy, even today, is being suppressed. The spiritual energy of women is suppressed, and even when we see them in politics, it's hardly at a very high level. So this was a poem that I wrote when I was very attracted to all those alternatives to the conventional feminism and lack of power that women have, called Even Then. Even then, we broke the isms of home and kin to follow long-haired Dionysus, pick mushrooms with Adonis, and kiss the vine to bloom. Even then, women rights made seasons run and corn come up. We the Gorgons under mask, we the Maenads sweet and wild, we the moon-bound mares, we the Queen of Sheba. That's why I was attracted to the Buddhist female icons, the Dakinis, the Skywalkers, the Bodhisattvas like Kuan Yin, the figures of compassion, the Tara. So we need that. And coming to Eugene, one finds plenty of circles of goddesses. So I'm going to read a variety of poems that give you a sense of threads of what's been important in my 68 years. And Scott isn't here, is he? Scott from Tsunami? No. Well, this is really for him, because he was one of the first people I met when I came to Eugene to check it out. I knew two people, one here and one in Portland, and so here's a poem about my first night in Eugene. Place that's kept me. It was your waters, Willamette Valley, lured me from the other coast to a place that's kept me ever since. Welcomed by you an April morning in Cottage Grove, I woke from deep sleep to rain-drenched sunshine, creek gushing under sequined firs by the open window, and a string of dreams perfectly recalled. A mare and foal drank from my hands. From low tide, a scuba diver wades towards me. In wet sand, my husband finds an old book on Mercury, the deity. We find an outcropping of pink crystals above a reservoir, water wide as Niagara rushing into it. 8 moons later, our Toyota crossed into Oregon to a double rainbow we thought so uncommon. Little did we know. Kind of something that goes along with poetry of place is cats. We live in Cat City, and we now have two, and we had one when we got here. And I've started fostering cats, and it's quite a chore. Fostering a fur person. The striped body of a small she-cat stretches in sleep in the fig tree's shade. Her time with us is set by owners who lost her in a move to Portland. We found them by microchip ID at a visit to the vet. They were overjoyed, said they'd claim her as soon as they could. As days passed, she began to rub her cheek into my hand, leaning in for a caress, whiskers and fine fur delicate. She proved brave in the face of our two boys, a graceful athlete who ran full out in summer grass, leaping at insects, stalking crows, careful not to strike. That's two cat boys. Her first and only time in our bed was the last night in our care. Her quiet sleep against my feet made me miss her even before her people came to get her. From then on, I was a goner. When they drove down and swept her up in their arms for the long ride home, I was looking for a happy ending when grief rose up to swat me. Just before they took her to the car, our old white ringtail appeared and touched his nose to hers. For hours, I didn't dare enter the bedroom and its waiting sea of tears. Attachment, attachment. Now, a lot of you know that I came into this life crazed with a love of horses, quite mysterious and unexplained. I've given up trying to understand it, but to honor that, I'm going to read one poem that's iconic of that love, and it focuses on a jockey. And her name is Rosina Pravnik. She is 27 years old, and she is a living centaur. In fact, she's an Amazon, a winged beauty. So this is a true story. A New Jersey girl born to horse people, her mother a trainer with opaline eyes, her dad a farrier. Fearless in pony races, she found later thrills on steeplechase circuits. I was never nervous on a horse. 27 now, she rides for bigger stakes, twice first in the Kentucky Oaks, took 5th in the Derby. Her 113 pounds guide edgy thoroughbreds through traffic at the turns, an artist with hands and minds to finesse the chaos of any track. I'm most myself on a horse. At the top of the stretch, light hands and a soft voice propel her mounts to win, place, or show. Asked in an interview to mimic sounds she chirps into equine ears, with a cagey smile she refuses. I have my limits. A broken collarbone, wrist, and back, her jockey entrance fee, nothing can keep her off horses or sway her from a goal proclaimed at 7, blowing her bugle. I want to win the Triple Crown. Now the end of this story is that the last year, in October, after winning a major Breeders' Cup championship race for fillies, she announced a sudden retirement. She was pregnant. by her husband, who's a trainer. Now, she will be riding again, but not in the races, so, and so it goes. But she'll be, she'll always be an Amazon woman. When we came to Eugene, we were happy to find that it was full of tree huggers and and activists for the Green Man and Mother Earth. Last year, I learned that there were people who were going into the California redwoods, and they were stealing the burls that grow on those trees, very valuable for artistic work and so on. I was furious. This is my rant. Mad with grief for the Sequoia sempervirens. By the way, these burls can get up to 100 pounds, sometimes 10 tons, and they are part of the reproductive process of these virtually unkillable trees. Yo, burl poachers, with cold brutality and total absence of biophilia, under cloak of night you steal into sacred groves of redwood cathedrals, Earth's oldest trees. Your chainsaws tear open the dense burls they make for self-healing. How would you like having the scabs on your knees cut away with a filthy hatchet? How dare you hack the heart of an evergreen 400 years old, your own ancestors likely alive somewhere when it was just a sapling? Is it for lust of a fistful of dollars that you lose your heart and mind to murder an elder, its benevolence irreplaceable? I can't ever forgive you this trespass, because I am mad with grief. Adrienne Rich poses a question that's related to this in her poem, In Times Like These. Why do I tell you anything? Because you still listen. In times like these, to have you listen at all, it's necessary to talk about trees. And you think about the truth of that. Oh, the time is flowing. I spent a lot of time on the massage table of an Irish masseuse, and there's something about her room that opens me up to visions, and I've written a whole bunch of poems about that, and this is one of them. Nature wants beauty. I don't ask for this to happen, it just happens. A quiet presence sensed in the massage room. From a forest path arched by foliage, a brown-skinned man, chest bare, arrayed in tall headdress of green and yellow feathers, each hand bearing a fat ear of corn. A silent message received. In your own yard, nature's allies have been waiting. Notice and link with them so they can instruct and show you medicines to gather. Open your mind to the invisible ones in your neglected backyard. Make ready to amplify the good you already have to share. And please take care to dress in festive colors and fabrics of respect when you visit shrubs and flowers, stones and vines, clear-winged bugs, the soil itself, however poor, for all feed on beauty. It is their essence, and they flourish in its display. Take time to do this work, and your life will be a plenitude of vitality and blessing. Until you begin, you won't know just how much you need it. In the dozen years that I've worked at the museum, volunteered at the museum, giving tours to people of all ages. I've written quite a number of poems about these adventures, and this is one of them. Looking at art with girls. If my destiny is sheltered, may the grace of this privilege reach and bless the other infants who are destined for torn places. So said Irish priest John O'Donoghue. So with that in mind, summer art camp, languid after lunch. It's time to explore pop art with 7 girls, born long after it was new, and who have forgotten their name tags, and my memory not what it once was. They are diffident or fierce, pleading as we head upstairs, can't we take the elevator? Our first stop, a painting of a cowboy star astride his white rocking horse in downtown LA. Not a sagebrush in sight. It leaves them cold. We've seen this already. Next, the Remington Bronco in bronze grabs their attention, but soon they plop onto comfy museum seats, the only objects they can touch. Interest in art plummets. One girl then another feels ill, asked to be excused, led away by a chaperone. 2 p.m., the last day of art camp. It's all old hat to them. I suggest the more you look, the more you'll see, but their eyes are hungry for what's fresh. Straying, they spot a Korean basket of pure white porcelain and circle it, swooning. On to Japan. Seated on the floor, we gaze at a canvas painted just this year. Masses of skulls and flowers in vivid teal, magenta, and anime black bring a burst of excitement. The small, repeating circles look like emoticons. And one girl says how death is always present in the midst of life and fun. Last stop is a series of abstract Italian prints, lines and stripes, pulsating colors, a geometry of grids and overlapping spirals. It's our favorite gallery! And they go on to tell me exactly what they love about each object. The girls are brilliant. You absolutely never know what you're going to have. Okay, I'm going to wind down soon. All right, so this poem is also related to the museum. It's a poem about a visit to the studio in Newport of Rick Bartow. He invited us and we spent many hours with him. And he has an exhibit coming up in April, opens on the 17th of April, called Things You Know But Cannot Understand. He's a remarkable artist, and these are some impressions of his studio and his space. Carvings and marks. Step into Bartow Place. Cross the borders into an unknown nation where language is made by colored marks and cuts from carving knives. In paint-dabbed shirt, the artist, tall and shy, welcomes us to his clearing in the woods, a village of weathered buildings, mounds of found and discarded objects, road signs, baby shoes, Japanese inscriptions. Everything here speaks. Crow beak glints on tallest fir, totem figures lean down like mastheads, yellow guardian dog with keen eye misses nothing. Spirits are lodged in a pile of red madrone boughs. Invisible presences buzz and pick at visitors. Housed in defunct trailer, stacks of handmade paper whisper of global friendships. Even the printing press wants to shout. In the carving studio, hooked tools line up for work. Under green light, a clutter of figures. Wooden torso twists, big teeth grind. A woman's face in resin, Her golden brow, ancient and futuristic, shares space with an amputee, a winged mask crowned by bird, a pail embraced by eel and salmon. Day brims, but in another room darkness dominates on paper and mask, one eye covered by black hand, the other turned from unseen terror. The maker must follow the mark's commands. They morph into teeth, double rows under snout, around the black oval of a dog mouth. He works 3 drawings at once, creation's fire moving through an arm. Neon colors and black marks, those little dictators, shapeshift in frenetic dance, pastel chalk shattering onto floor, erasures whiten charcoal, face after face slides away, layer of self, bear, dog, human, come to light. Color and Marx's utterance cauterize the wounds and consume darkness in the spirit. From staccato handwork, a golden eye emerges, animal and human, beacon to dispel nightmares. A mouth breaks into grin. Joy breaks through. So for Rick, who's a Native American and also a Vietnam vet suffering from PTSD, his art is his healing, and it's very spiritual and shamanistic. There's a collage that I did of his work on the wall over there, and
What's his last name?
Bartow, B-A-R-T-O-W, and John Whitty's book, Second Nature. John knows Rick, has an image by Rick Bartow. It's the animal and human self. He also plays steel guitar, but he had a stroke recently, so we're lucky that he's doing this big show. Okay, I need to wind down. I'm going to end with 2 poems. These are very intimate poems, but sometimes we have to risk, and I feel like I'm with friends, so here goes. Sabena certainly shared so much from her heart. This is a poem of self-healing, and I've worked on it for well over a year. And I thank Denise and my dear friend Catherine Riley, who published my chapbook book. We were in a writing group together, and they both helped me very much. Wildfires. It begins with a quote by Emily Dickinson. Sorry to, save this for last, but Emily Dickinson, you cannot put a fire out. A thing that can ignite can go itself without a fan. So these are snapshots of my life. Watch a child of 2 strain against her red leather harness, chasing a cat's tail along a wooden fence. See a toddler in dim light of a summer cottage, lured with taste of sweet orange by a burly man whose accent and hands she can't understand. Witness the girl of 6 smash her mom's crystal bowl onto the tile floor, her instant remorse, mother's calm, and dad's polite spanking. Watch a delicate schoolgirl sent home early for wearing a fringed flannel shirt. She arms herself with gun and holster, rides off on imagined Mustangs. Angered by probing fingers of the boy next door, she becomes an Amazon who takes a sharp quartz rock and sees her arm hurl it spear-like into his dining room window. Feel her relief that no one's home, her shame when she confesses. Encourage the young woman pitching dishes at a silver radiator, pissed by a boyfriend's indifference, her rage released in a clatter. Under a full moon in July, her teeth leave a red garland on her man's bared chest, a penalty for his neglect. Years later, the one she wed receives a fist after she warns, "I'm going to hit you." Not even his tenderness can douse the wildfires, the angry red itch no ointment will calm. And then as an au revoir end, no longer consumed by panic, now she feels the embers lodged under her skin and reads their code, warming herself by a steady flame at her core, free to lope, untethered in open spaces. So I think that's a good place to begin, those open spaces and untethered. And you know, this is where language takes you on a journey. I had no idea what was going to come out of this. I had a few memories and then, so I encourage you all to dare to go there. So I'm very happy that Denise is reading next. She's the original Primavera, one of the original goddesses.
Our next reader is D.M. Wallace. And by the way, I have this really personal connection with each of these three wonderful women, and I didn't mention that Claudia and I have a connection named Zenyatta, which is the most beautiful of racehorses that I have been in love with and still am. And she, of course, loves all the racehorses, but I have this one horse I'm smitten with. So, Denise, I met when she was pregnant for her how old now son?
30.
Her 30-year-old son. Well, I had a 10-year-old by then. And I was teaching a yoga class for pregnant women. And here we are.
May I make one comment?
Please.
And this is a brief to Sel and you.
Yes.
There once was a mare named Vinyata whose hoofs went pity-a-pata. She won the race at her own pace and still left the world a la gaga.
Thank you. Okay, Denise. D.M. Wallace. Denise D.M. Wallace grew up in Twin Falls, Idaho, but thinks of herself as a true Oregonian since she has lived in Eugene, Oregon for over 30 years now, and has pioneer ancestors who settled the Tillamook area. She has been writing poems since she was a teenager and has been published in several literary journals and anthologies. In addition to writing, she loves water, and you must have noticed on her poster that she's wearing her bathing suit. and she loves hiking, cooking, and digging in the dirt. Welcome.
Really, thank you all so much for coming. It means a lot to me anytime I get to read my poems to good listeners. So I just have about 20 minutes of poems. I'm going to read 10 poems actually. But I didn't know it was Billy Collins' birthday today.
I kept it to myself.
But I actually picked a Billy Collins poem that I like quite a bit to read. And he's one of my favorite poets for a lot of reasons. But this poem is called Despair. Despair. So much gloom and doubt in our poetry. Flowers wilting on the table, the self regarding itself in a watery mirror. Dead leaves cover the ground. The wind moans in the chimney, and the tendrils of the yew tree inch toward the coffin. I wonder what the ancient Chinese poets would make of all this, these shadows and empty cupboards. Today, with the sun blazing in the trees, my thoughts turn to the great 10th century celebrator of experience, Wahoo, whose delight in the smallest things could hardly be restrained, and to his joyous counterpart in the western provinces, Yeehaw. Oh my God, I love that poem. You know, it's so serious and it just draws you in, and then it just like goes. So I like to write the poems of Yeehaw and Wahoo, but I read that poem for a couple of reasons. One, of course, is just for the comic relief, because I think that that's always a good thing. Also because I really admire that he writes poems about poetry, which I don't really do so much, but he has quite a few poems about the act of writing poetry and poetry itself, which I greatly admire. And also because my poetry is really nothing like that. So I kind of wanted to read it, and then my own poems are sort of a counterpoint in a way, because I write a lot about my own personal experience, and I have never really liked the idea of being a confessional poet, because as a recovered Catholic, I just don't like the word confessional very much. So I think of myself as like writing real personal poetry, with the hope that through writing through my deeply felt personal experience, I can share something that's universal. So most of my poems are fairly personal. And I decided with these 10 poems today to read poems that are really about my relationship to other people, or animals, or strangers, or even like unearthly beings that are sort of just perceived creatures. So I'm going to start with a really old poem of mine that's, over 30 years old now, but I have reworked it a lot, and it remains one of my favorite poems. It's called Looking for Someone, and I've dedicated it to Provincetown, Massachusetts, where I got to live for a short time. Looking for someone for Provincetown, Mass. The harbor's lone light is the queen of this night, her green pulse piercing the dark. A white-haired woman comes from her well-lit home, asks me if I've seen her dog, explains the animal's habit, how when someone leaves the gate open, she's gone. I wish I came bearing her dog, or really that I were the dachshund, close to the ground, my own nose burning through this narrow street down to the sea, and this old woman come to find me. In my filial bed I lie down, bury my head and let my child nurse until sleep takes him, my nipple caught and fluttering against the neat roof of his new mouth. I can still hear her calling her dog's name into the thinning night. Bertie, 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 a keening that rides on the rising wind, missing only the hanging ears of her friend, wandering the green and fishy sands untouched. And then the second poem I'm going to read is also an older poem that I've reworked significantly, so some of you might recognize it because it has been around for a while. I think it's getting better. This poem is called Winter Solstice. Winter Solstice. We pour out our pockets late at night, see the endings for the beginnings they are, moving from bed to stove, from stove to bed, as if toward places of worship. As if we were children, and we are, we play a game called Sleep with the Darkness. our expectations marked by candles carefully lit and placed. The hours, like gloved fingers, push us through the narrowing eye of a needle, our fibrous bodies cold, yet not indifferent, many stranded and difficult to squeeze through such a narrow passageway. As if we were angels, and we are, we play a game called patience with this season, bearing ourselves towards spring with a child's vengeance, that sheer will we were born with. We kneel on quilted edges, waiting for the world to turn, for the sun to strike us square in the face, daring hope. And then this little poem is just a poem that I wrote a few years ago. I think it was 3 years ago when we had that spring snow that came after all the blossoms around the trees. And this is called Spring Snow. The dense quiet, then the glow that brightens the sky even at 2 a.m. The angel of the intricate snowflake has touched down, softening each edge, quiet and sneaky with her saving grace. Pink and pink-white flowering fruit trees will bend and break under her weight. Water will run in the streets like small rivers, bounding over the broken limbs. But right this minute, she is light of step and whispering into my sleeping ear, awaken. And then this next piece is a poem that I wrote for one of my cats. I've been playing around the last few years with trying to use repetition in poems and repeating words and sounds to try to create sort of a more feeling experience as opposed to an intellectual experience. So this is a poem called Purifying Stillness for Oliver, the orange one. Small bells hang still, then ring in a slight wind. There is nothing to do. The cat chases his tail, cleans his belly and paws, then stares into space. Both of us hang in the sound of the ringing bells, their subtle music making the air more still. There is nothing to do. The wind in all its wisdom clears the air, purifying stillness. A pure music rings and settles in my belly, rising and falling, my clear eyes staring into space. The cat purrs even in sleep, and there is nothing to do. The bells hold us in stillness. So it's funny because it's when you read it out loud, sometimes I think it works better on the page. But anyway, it's an experiment. And then I'm going to read the next couple poems, are love poems, and a little more intimate, I guess we would call them. This first one is, I think, a pretty universal experience. The first line of the poem, the first line is the title. And I managed to get a pun in here, which I'm pretty proud of. My lover is coming back to me, flying over the Rockies at 35,000 feet. He is a superhero, alert and restless in his cheap seat. The western wind buffets the nose of the silver plain, bobbing like an insect on the dark surface of water. Deep teal of trees and rugged peaks rising sharply below. See how much I trust the engine, the wings, all that technology, beating back time and space as if it were nothing. I thought about having a glass of wine since y'all had refreshments. But all right. This is a poem that I got from a dream, and it's for my husband. It's for Jeff. It's called The Marvelous. It's been pointed out to me that I have a little bit of that 19th century sensibility because I like to capitalize abstract nouns. And I finally just decided I'm just going to do it. But this is called The Marvelous, and it does have some capital abstract nouns. Like the best gifts, hardly expected, this dream awakens me to us. For the first time, it is clearly you, my love, who joins me in the dream. Both of us, looking upward in a huge, darkened shell that seems to float at the top of the world. A million bright constellations move overhead, yet it is merely a light bulb we reach to change. Oh, but within the light bulb is one marvelous insect, a small, opalescent creature suspended within a blue orb, unattached and hovering perfectly, speaking to us, offering undying love, even as we trade its magic for a more worldly connection with light, to all the blackness between stars. And then, moving right along, I told myself I would slow down, but I feel like I'm reading fast. This poem, every once in a while, you get a boon from the universe, and a poem just like blasts through, like almost fully formed. And this one kind of did that, and it was a real bonus because it was from sort of an icky experience that spawned it. But it's called Ultrasound Odalisque. A hard-to-read mammogram has brought me to this cool, almost dark room, a narrow bed set among machines and blinking lights, the whir of a computer. I am asked to take my left arm over my head and roll slightly to the right, a position I offer to my lover or to sleep, and now to the skilled technician. She barely looks at me, but focuses on computer images of shadow, sound waves echoing off my dense tissues that reveal edges and outlines of concern. At ease in this angle of repose and languor, I rise up and embrace the beauties of a more romantic era, my breasts pink and shy, offered up for the sake of art. The wand slides easily and impersonal over my breast, the nipple rising straight up to the ceiling in piqued attention, if not arousal, my whole being overwhelmed with the desire to live. At the last reading here, Ralph Salisbury said something about the poignancy of medical office waiting rooms. And it really touched me because I often feel that way when I'm in these sort of impersonal medical situations. They bring up this just incredible poignancy. And then this is slightly more personal, and it's I'll just read it. Well, no, actually, I'll tell you how I wrote it. I don't know if you've ever done the exercise where you try to really take your mind into a certain body part and then write from that part of your body. And it's really a powerful thing to do, especially if you have an injury or you have a part of your body that's not functioning correctly, to try to get it to speak to you and tell you what it needs, right? So this is, the first line of this poem is also the title. My breasts want to please you, to sit easily in your hands, to feel protected by your desire, or by your will to master their form, your fingers free and moving, to know all, and knowing all, loving all. My breasts want you to have them, to hold like fresh fruit, warmed and ripening in morning sun, your hands cupping each one, your lips soft and eager at the nipples, now sweet and tight like blackberries. My breasts want to comfort you, to make a place for your head, to be healed of worry, to be fed what your spirit craves. This soft and supple answer to your search for grace, my heart unfolding. And then I just have two more poems that I want to read. My mother died in June of 2012, which was incredibly difficult for me. And I chose not to read several poems that I knew I would just cry. So I was going to spare y'all that. And I do want to read a couple poems though for my mom and for my brothers and sisters. We've all handled it very differently. This first poem is called Moss in Winter. And I built it out of a fragment that I had from years ago. And then I went back to it after this experience of loss and was able to, I finally kind of knew what that fragment was about a little bit more. It's a very mysterious poem with a lot of capitalized abstract nouns. I think I enjoy writing about them just because I think I had a writing teacher that said you couldn't do that. So, here we go. Moss in Winter. Love, you and your sister Death are a set of insatiable twins. One's countenance becomes blurred and the other relieves you, calling and calling into the weak light, saying goodbye, but meaning only good night. You blot each other out, woo us and leave us to our bitters, our personal drugs. In love, death is a green cloak enshrouding the dream field, while at death's little door, the memory of the lover divides and covers everything. Is this soft bed of moss deadly, I ask, beating my palms on tree bark, evoking the spirits of the beloved and blaming them for closing forever the wounds that would have healed us. And then lastly, I want to read a pretty recent poem, and as many of you, I'm sure, have had the experience of when someone dies and you have to clean out the house, right? So you have to go and you have to dig through this plethora of stuff that this person's left behind, and it's really difficult and funny, and it's just quite the process. But I wrote this poem and I dedicate it to my brothers and sisters who I went through that process with. So it's called Heirlooms. I have figurines now because my mother had them, and I couldn't let them go into the auction boxes. The goose girl in green, the twin child musicians, the Avon egg with the red-breasted robin feeding her young and inscribed, every spring is a new beginning. The goose girl is my favorite, an old friend from childhood. She holds 3 bright-eyed goslings in a basket on her arm, the other hand reaching down to the elegant goose that stands at her feet, a pointed slipper of russet red peeking out from her glorious green skirt. The boy twin plays an accordion, a red bow tie and soft green jacket, a bit dressy with his black shorts and bare pink legs. His sister sports an oversized turquoise bow atop her blonde head, her orange skirt revealing white scalloped bloomers. The porcelain egg cracks open my heart. The robin is my mother, who called us her chicks, feeding each of us with love for new beginnings. Even as she left us, these talismans of joy and simple beauty, glowing lanterns along a dark road. And I thank you all very much.